There's another one. Look, I'm sorry, but I would love to see more comedians who say shit like this get slapped. Might teach them humility and manners.
Boy, that guy really has a lot of respect for the movie G.I. Jane, huh?
That's at right. That's at Simi Transy. Simi demands rights. They them. So that's another trans person who is calling for violence.
But what does he care about Chris Rock? Like, do they just want to get Chappelle so much that the Chris Rock thing has nothing to do with anything trans?
No,
and all these people jumped on it like, yeah, get Chappelle. Like,
well, it seems like they're violent. It seems like there's a swath of the vocal trans community. It seems like the most vocal ones. I mean, I don't know many trans people except the ones who are vocal. So I don't know. I'm not in a position.
Quite a few, and none of them were like this.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. I mean, I've heard you talk about that. You know, quite a few trans people, and they're
in New York, dude. If you're gonna be in New York up all night around town, you're gonna you're gonna have a lot of interaction with trans people. I can't. I've never met someone who acted like that ever in real life. On Twitter, you would get the impression it's like really common, you know. So I don't know. Like, Twitter sucks. It really does. Like,
so it's just crazy that, I mean, and again, I think I would be considered an ally for the LGBTQIA community, not the A's, the LGBTQIs. I stop at the A's, and
A's?
It's asexual.
Oh, pick a team. I'm joking. That's the one.
I'm
no
joking
one will
too. I know that's the one. That's the one I make jokes about. But I can advocate for their 100% civil rights and no discrimination in any way, in employment, in housing, in anything. So that used to be called an ally. So I don't know what they'll call me now, but that's what I think.
You know, partly this is keyboard work. Like, you know why I probably never met anyone in person like this? Because that was people who you meet in person. And a lot of these is like...
Yo, I heard my name.
Yeah, and oh god, another one. Another one. Anyway, like one more question.
You fucking Jack. You fucking imperialist piece of shit.
Bro, I know you got fucking corn for teeth by the way you sitting up here like this. I was gonna say this before.
Wait, isn't your ugly ass mom American? So like, only 50% of you can be saying gap shit towards fucking Mikey. I mean, only like half of you.
The FDA gets its money from Big Pharma, just so you know, 70% of it. So we should stop that. No, why do we ever have a conversation about stopping the funding of FDA from the people they're regulating? Why does that ever come up? So because we just accept corruption, and the people, Big Pharma, own the media. That's why. And you want to know who rules you? You're ruled by corporations, and one of them is Big Pharma. That's who rules you. Why? How do you know that they rule over you? Because you're not allowed to criticize them correctly. I got to watch what I say in this report, or YouTube will take down my channel because we are ruled by Big Pharma, just like the FDA is. Hey, Pfizer accused of COVID profiteering as first quarter sales hit $26 billion. $26 billion. Do you know the entire recording music industry in the United States? You know how much money it generates a year? Everything from Mozart to Snoop Dogg to whoever is current right now that I'm out of touch and don't know who it is. Every recording artist. Do you know how much money the whole entire recording music industry generates? The whole music industry generates in the United States $12 billion a year. This one company made more than twice that just in 3 months. Do you know how much power that gives them? You know how much power it gives them all the power. They own the media and they own the politicians. They own everything. They're your ruler.
Okay,
Yeah.
prove it.
I mean, like, I'm not gonna go through all my fucking mentions and look for someone with like a monkey and sun emoji being
Some rants,
a
okay,
goblin.
Yeah, but here's the thing. No, here's the thing. I mean, like, show me a time in which Haas has been transphobic or homophobic. Show me a time in which I have been homophobic or transphobic. Show me a time in which Caleb has been.
Yeah, Haas.
Yeah, show me a time.
Haas is when he was making fun of the were army.
That's not transphobic at all.
That he was fucking pronoun jokes in general.
Pronoun jokes. Wait a second. I know plenty. Wait a second. I know plenty of trans people who make jokes about pronouns who think it's stupid. That's not transphobic. Like, what pronouns you like? The putting your pronouns on Twitter, like, that has nothing to do with transphobia. Are you gonna actually show an example of him like denying the reality of trans people or something along those lines, or are you just gonna say, oh, he made a joke about were them army? Like is that really all you got?
So you brought up Caleb Maupin a second ago, right? Yeah. So one, Caleb is.
So now it seems like the only people ever speaking up for lefty points of view are rabid right-wingers. Thomas Massey talking about no-fly zone in Syria and in Ukraine, how crazy that is. Rand Paul saying the government is the biggest misinformation spewer in the country. Rand Paul standing up and saying we want oversight on $40 billion. And now Marjorie Taylor Greene telling the truth about Ukraine funding. And so now all those people on YouTube whose views are dwindling and dwindling, they keep doing Marjorie Taylor Greene video after Marjorie Taylor Greene video. And you know who I'm talking about, the usual suspects, the NBC contract boys, the Kyle Kalinskis, the TYTs, the shit libs. They can't stop with their Tucker Carlson, still doing Donald Trump videos, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz. That's the Ben Shapiro. That's the entirety of their fucking catalog now. They do no news. They do just clickbait hate on right-wingers. I wonder how they're going to cover Marjorie Taylor Greene. Have you seen any coverage of this from those usual suspects, Jackson?
No, I haven't. Like you said, I just continue to see them doing these cheap, smear videos against them without actually acknowledging the substance of the most important issues of our time when it comes to this World War III that is essentially breaking out in Ukraine. I mean, no mention from any of those people as to what Chomsky said about Trump when Trump was advocating for peace. No
Did they
mention
cover that? They didn't cover
Marjorie
that either.
Taylor Greene.
They didn't honestly.
Nothing.
They didn't cover that that Chomsky agrees that Trump is the only statesman calling for a peace in Ukraine. They didn't. Nobody covered that. Besides, you covered it, I'm sure, right?
Of course,
I covered it.
It's huge.
I covered it. Is that it? Is that the entirety of the coverage that got?
I think so.
In America,
at the end of the day, the shit libs they worship these globalist leaders that are neoconservatives and neoliberals alike that are fomenting this war.
Now, here's a crazy Democrat gonna respond to Marjorie Taylor Greene. So Marjorie Taylor Greene just laid down a bunch of truth that is super refreshing to hear being said on the floor of Congress. And shame on the Democrats for not saying that themselves and ceding the anti-war lane to someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene. Michael Tracy tweets out, Marjorie Taylor Greene said last night that $40 billion for Ukraine, but there's no baby formula for American mothers and babies. Stop funding regime change and money laundering scams. Here's how Jamie Raskin, Democrat, responded on behalf of the House Democrats, which is now a 100% war-crazed party. You want to hear how he responded? Here's how he responded.
Here's a formula for the destruction of democracy, repeating Putin's propaganda and disinformation and appeasing imperialist assaults on sovereign nations.
So immediately called a Putin puppet. I'll play it again. Let me play it again.
Here's a formula for the destruction of democracy, repeating Putin's propaganda and disinformation and appeasing imperialist assaults on sovereign nations.
So you see, mentioning baby formula is undermining democracy, I guess. Pushing a proxy war in Ukraine is strengthening democracy. So what he's doing there is making Democrats look bad. That's what Marjorie Taylor did. She made Democrats look bad. And that's a form of disinformation. And everyone who isn't a Russian asset knows that. And that's what he's saying. She's doing the Russia's bidding. You see, misinformation is information that isn't true. Disinformation is information that comes from people we hate. A cat lady sang that to me on a TikTok. So that's, and watch the woman behind. So I want you to watch this woman in the blue as he starts to do the red baiting. Watch how she starts to smile and enjoy it. Watch this. This is great.
Here's a formula for the destruction of democracy: repeating Putin's propaganda and disinformation and appeasing imperialist assaults on sovereign nations.
So calling up, that's it. You're an appeaser. Anybody who's anti-war. So what has happened here, in case no one's noticing, the parties have flipped when it comes to foreign policy. The Republicans used to be crazy war hawks, and you associate war hawkery with a right-wing position. Now the Democrats are the right-wingers, and the Republicans are the anti-war lefties. So that's all that. That's Republican right-wing red-baiting bullshit.
He has that thing that Trump has, this kind of Teflon shield, where any critique of what he says rolls off. And some of it, I think, is because liberals often overcharge him, like charge him with more than they can prove, in the same way they did with Donald Trump. So, for example, there's an anecdote at the beginning of part 1 of this series that opens talking about how he's covering immigrants at the southern border, and he described them as making America poorer and dirtier. People obviously objected to this. He says, look, this isn't racism. This is just the facts of the matter. Here's a report that says for every immigrant that comes to the southern border, there's 8 pounds of trash that get left in the desert. It's literally dirtier. And I think that for people who subscribe to his, broader politic and feel themselves to be underdogs, don't necessarily want to see themselves as racist, even if their behavior might indicate otherwise, there's enough plausible deniability in most of what he says that liberals who critique him as being racist, the critique doesn't land. And in fact, Tucker Carlson then weaponizes that and says they want to shut us up by calling us racist. And I see that pattern working out. And in my personal life, it has caused me to want to avoid the whole thing because it seems like a lose-lose. But that also, when I read an article like this and see his growing influence and see the growing influence of this kind of thinking, to your point, Max, it's not just about Tucker Carlson. And I'm starting to feel like ignoring it is not adequate at the same time as I don't know exactly how to combat.
So what were they really afraid of with Trump? They were afraid he wouldn't do this. That's what they were afraid of. They were afraid he wouldn't go along with them because he didn't come up in the Republican farm team. He didn't come up in the organization. He didn't have groomers, Trump. Trump didn't have donors for his whole life like everybody else. He was a donor. So he didn't owe favors like everybody else. They couldn't control him like they could control everybody. So what they did was they concocted Russiagate, red baited him for 4 straight years, and impeached him twice because he didn't have his mind right. So if you were the anti-war person, you should have voted for Trump and the Republicans. That's what this means. If you're pro-war, you vote for Joe Biden and the Democrats.
I was trying to save abortion. That's why I voted for Biden.
And so now they give a right-winger like DeSantis, who should be repulsive to people who are on the left. Now they make him attractive. And how are they doing it? Watch, here's what he says.
But clearly, our entire principles that the country was founded on, you cannot have a ministry of truth in this country. And so let's get real here. Let's make sure that we're doing things to benefit Floridians and Americans, but we're not going to let Biden get away with this one. So we'll be fighting back.
The Democrats are losing everybody who's gives a lick about liberty, freedom, it's civil rights. They're losing everybody. They tried to paint Trump, remember, during Black Lives Matter, that Trump was a crazy authoritarian who's going to send the army into the city. Well, now Joe Biden is doing worse. And so they're making guys like that look attractive. If you're for free speech and civil rights and liberties, who are you going to vote for? This guy or Joe Biden? Tough call, though, isn't it?
Just to kind of follow up on something that Ben said about how 0.1% of the population in Nicaragua might believe that China is the new imperialist force in Latin America. And I'm just thinking, Danny in New York City, myself in London, probably it's more like 0.1% of the population don't think that China's the new colonialist force in Latin America. And ultimately, that comes down to, obviously, we're exposed to incredible nonstop propaganda, which relates to, like so many other things, racism and imperialism. On the one hand, a racism that says, well, you got these Chinese and they're kind of cynical and kind of inscrutable, and they're just, out for their own interests, and no one knows really what they're thinking, but they're fundamentally kind of these evil Fu Manchu type characters that seek world domination. And then on the other hand, you've got the Latin Americans, and they're, for want of a more elegant expression, a bit stupid, a bit overly trusting, a bit naive, and hence they sign these deals with the Chinese without realizing what they're getting into, as if Latin America, having gone through 500 years of colonialism, doesn't recognize colonialism when it sees it, and it's the same dynamic with Africa. Look at the actual difference in China's record in Latin America if you compare it to the European colonial powers, and then in the 19th and 20th century to the United States. What coups has China organized in Latin America? What regime change has China organized in Latin America? What troops, what military bases does China have in Latin America? What unilateral illegal sanctions and embargoes does China impose in Latin America and the Caribbean? Imperialism isn't just a word, and it's not just a policy choice. Imperialism is a system. It's a political and economic and military system which the United States and the big West European powers can be shown to be engaged in, and that China can be shown not to be engaged in.
Here's some new information. Moscow believes that laboratories in Ukraine funded by the US were making biological weapons components, but that local staff was being kept in the dark about their research, a senior Russian general said on Thursday. Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov, who commands the Nuclear, Biological, and Chemical Protection Forces of Russia, presented documents and imagery showing why the military has come to such a conclusion. We believe that components of biological weapons were being made at or on the territory of Ukraine. He noted that the documents he was presenting have the signatures of real officials and are certified by the seal of organizations for those journalists and experts in the West doubting their veracity. So this is one of those moments where we can look at the Russian officials who are presenting these documents, and they're real documents. They've been seized by the Russians. And if they were fake, I feel like someone would come out and be able to prove that they're fake, but they haven't been able to do so yet. So these are the claims. One document dated March 6, 2015 confirms the, quote, direct participation of the Pentagon in the financing of military biological projects in Ukraine. The U.S. officially funded the projects through the Ukrainian Ministry of Health, according to the agreement on joint biological activities. However, the evidence shows the real recipients of some $32 million in funds were Ukrainian Defense Ministry laboratories in Kiev, Odessa, Lviv, and Kharkiv. These facilities were chosen by the U.S. Department of Defense Threat Reduction Administration, the DTRA, and the contractor Black & Veatch, who, by the way, did a lot of work with Hunter Biden, to carry out the UP8 project aimed at studying the pathogens of Crimea Congo hemorrhagic fever. I'm not going to be able to pronounce these. Leptospirosis and hantaviruses, Kirillov said, pointing a slide with the Pentagon's request. Now, I don't know what those are, but apparently they were carrying out, studying the pathogens of these various diseases in these biolabs.
It's more, I think it's really important if you want to understand what the agenda here is with disinformation and censorship, is to watch Barack Obama's speech. at the Stanford Cyber Policy Center, where he's speaking to young people who are basically being trained and funded to implement the kind of censorship agenda that will be censorship without censorship, we can call it. Obama said, I am a radical civil libertarian. Like, I'm a free speech absolutist. So he doesn't believe in illegalizing certain forms of speech or suing people, having the federal government sue people for what they've said, like the Parents Music Resource Center. What he wants to do, and he said it right there, it took forever for him to get to the point. At about the 45-minute mark in his speech, he said that he wants the algorithms that social media uses to amplify certain speech and limit other speech to be open, but not to be open to the public, not to be open to me and you are limited by that algorithm. He wants it to be open to those young people in that room who are basically national security or cybersecurity drones, and then they will get to determine the algorithm. And he called this reform. Those people, he kept saying we need to reform social big tech and social media platforms. He didn't call to nationalize it or to break them up, as even Steve Bannon and Donald Trump did. And that's because by reforming it, and he said we need more government involvement, not more popular or democratic involvement, which is what would take place through nationalization. Those people in that room who are just completely politically conformist, centrist, cybersecurity, national security drones will be in charge. And then he also proposed having consultant roles for NGOs that are backed by the Obama Foundation, which is itself backed by corporate America and the national security establishment. And those NGOs will be fronted.
Used to be when there was a gun nut, they would scream for gun laws. Now they scream for censorship. And in America, there's a mass shooting every day. There's a mass shooting every day. Google, how many mass shootings have there been this year, 2022, in the United States? I don't know, 90? I'll guess 90. I'm going to guess 90. The white supremacist terrorist who killed at least 10 people at a grocery store in Buffalo, New York, and live streamed it, Peyton Grendon, published a fascist manifesto using the same black sun Nazi symbol used by Ukraine neo-Nazi Azov militia, which NATO is arming and training.
According to NPR, 198 mass shootings in 2022.
So I was low. I didn't even get half. 192. 198 mass shootings have already happened in the United States just this year. That's roughly one every day, I'm pretty sure. How many days of the year are there so far? I bet that's more than one a day. Right? So we're 4.5 months in. 4 times 3, that's 120. Yeah, that's more than one mass shooting a day. So you every day you could say we need more censorship. And what they're not telling you is that this guy is somehow has an affiliation or an alliance or an affection for the Nazis in Ukraine that we're currently funding.
Are we sure it's also, have we checked into if it maybe video games or have...
But Fox News, I read a study some years ago, Fox News is more inclined to have a leftist on than MSNBC and CNN. It usually has a liberal on its panels that I think is representative of what liberalism is, for better or for worse, as opposed to the CNN, MSNBC shows, which tend to have like a never Trump Republican, which is this anomalous thing, which is basically just a neoliberal Democrat at this point. And you don't get the kind of spice and engagement that you get when you watch Fox News.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Fox really figured it out. I remember right when...
I would say that Tucker Carlson in particular, I like watching Tucker Carlson. I watch him all the time. He's actually, if I had to choose which show, that's the one I would watch. And I used to hate Tucker Carlson. I mean, honestly, hate the guy. But I've grown to appreciate him. I don't agree with him on a lot of stuff, like the immigration stuff we definitely don't agree on. But he's so anti-establishment, at least that's the show he produces, that I think a lot of people on the right and the left appreciate that anti-establishment viewpoint.
Yes.
And that's what CNN is missing.
That's exactly right. When you said earlier that the liberal channels have failed to read the room and looking to the Women's March. The Women's March was not the movement of the era. The movement of the era was, I'm sorry, the Bernie movement in 2016 that got rebooted in 2020. You have a solid 30% of the Democratic Party that steadfastly is supporting a more populist brand of politics. That's about the same numbers that exist on the right. Republicans aren't all populists right now, but the most fiery, energetic part of the party is. And Tucker Carlson and a lot of these conservative shows cater to that. I would argue in bad faith, but cater to that kind of populist, verve. On the left, people like myself are more persona non grata on CNN and MSNBC than actual Republicans like Nicole Wallace, who was.
What does that fancy word mean?
I'm not allowed. I'm banned. I'm canceled. I'm very much a distasteful person. I'm literally, I have been blacklisted on one of the major MSNBC shows. According to a booker that tried to suggest me one time. I mean, this is where they are. They literally won't have anybody who would come on and ask basic questions about why the Democratic Party and the Biden administration is so out of touch with the state of New